find common characters. Now the question says, given an array A of strings made only from lower cases, so our string is going to be made of lower cases, return a list of all characters that show up in all strings within the list, including duplicates. So we want to find a character or a letter that shows up in all of the strings in our array. For example, if a character occurs 3 times in all strings but not 4 times, you need to include that character 3 times as our final answer. So let's say that we have our array and our characters are something like AAA, AAAA, and AAAAB. So we have to look for a character that occurs in all of these strings, and we want to account for duplicates. So we want to account for duplicates. So first letter is going to be A, and A occurs in all of the strings. So we have our A. Next is another A, because A occurs 4 times here, 4 here, and 3 here. And it's going to be another A. And now we have one A that's left over here and one A that's left over here. But since our first string doesn't have another A, we're going to count this only 3 times, not 4 times. So this is what the question is saying over here. Now let's look at our example 1. And our example 1 has E, L, L as common characters. So E is over here, over here, over here. So we add it to our result. L is here for Bella, L over here, and L over here. So we have our 1L. We have our second L, and second L, and we have our last L. So we were able to account for duplicates over here. Now, let's look at example 2. Well, all of the strings have C. We have our C. The first one has 2 O's, second one 1, and third one has 2 O's. But since second one has only 1 O, we have to put only 1 O in there, even though string 1 and 3 has 2 O's. The key point is that you have to account for duplicates. Now, how can we go about solving this problem? Well, first thing that just comes to my mind is, how about we create a array, and each array is going to have an object, and in that object we're going to have our characters as keys. Keys are going to be the characters, and the values are going to be the count of each characters. So depending on this, what we can do is we can then iterate through all the characters in one string. So let's say the first string, and iterate through all the characters and check if they exist in our object. If they do, we want to decrement the count by 1 because we have to be able to count for duplicates. And if the count is 0, we just ignore it or we can delete it. That's totally up to you. But as long as all the objects have that character and as long as the count is greater than 1, we want to add it to our result variable, which is going to be an array of characters. If you guys find this helpful, make sure you guys like and subscribe. Thanks. Our solution is going to have a time complexity of O(n) squared and space of O(n). Now remember that we talked about how we're going to go through each letter or each string and get a count of each characters, right? So we're going to have an array of objects, and each object is going to contain each character as keys and count of each character as values. But we want to do that for only 2 strings. The first one, we're gonna use it to iterate through our characters and check if each character is in the rest of our string or not. So if you want, you can actually just make a count of this too. It doesn't matter, but that's just extra space that we really don't need. But regardless, it shouldn't make too much of a difference. So let's first create our map, and this is going to be storing all the key value pairs for our object. So for the first object is going to be label, second roller. Now let's create a output variable to store our result, and let's just return that over here. Now we need to initialize our map so that it has an object with all the key value pairs, where again key represents the string and value represents the count of each character. Now let's implement that. So I'm going to make a for loop, and we're going to iterate through all the strings in an array, and we increment by 1 each time. Now I want to push in an object to my map array. So that's going to be map push an object. So let's just console log our map, and this should be a.length. Let's comment this one out. Right now you can see that we have a array of objects. And remember that we said that we can just skip this one. So let's just start at index 1. And we have two objects for our label and our roller string. Now we need to be able to iterate through our string and then add in those key value pairs. Now to do that, I'm just going to create another function, and I'm going to call this map string. And this is going to take two things. It's going to take an index and a word. Now this is also going to be iterating through the word that we're going to be given. So for let I is equal to 0, I is going to be less than word.length, and we increment by 1 each time because we want to iterate through all the characters in our word. Now what we have to do is, well, we have to check, does the object have the current character? And if it does, we want to increment the value by 1. If it doesn't, we want to set it to 1. So I'm going to make a variable named char, and this is going to represent the current character. And let's just, well, we can't actually console log our character yet, but let's just keep going. Actually, I'll just put my console log here so that we can look at it later. And now we need to be able to check if our current object has the current character, and if it doesn't, we need to add it, right? We need to increment by 1. So in order to do that, we need to access our map array, and we need to pass in our index, and our index is going to point to which object we should look at. And then we want to check if the character is there. What we'll do is we'll do map index character or 0 plus 1. And now let's go back down, and after we add in our objects, what we need to do is we need to iterate through our characters and then map our string. So we'll call map string over here, and then we'll pass in two things. Well, first thing is going to be index of our character, right? So that's going to be I minus 1 because we have two objects here. And second one is going to be current word. And as you can see, we have our two objects, so label and roller. Now, why do we pass I minus 1? Well, we have to pass it I minus 1 because if you were to pass in just I, you can see that we are getting an error. And we are getting an error because our map has only two objects. And when this increases to I is 2, there is no index 2 for our map. So we have to subtract 1 over here. And A at index I is our current word, so label and roller. And now we're passing in our index of 0 and our label for the first iteration. So that calls this function. This function takes index and a word, and character is word at index I, which we have over here. So let's delete them now. And what we're doing over here is, well, does our map at our given index, so right now our index is 0, have that character, which for the first one is going to be L. If it doesn't, it's going to return 0 and then add 1. If it does, it's going to return that value and then add 1. So how does this statement evaluate? Well, we have our value, which is this, right? Map index character. If we don't have a value, or if there's no key at all, what we're going to do is we are going to return 0 and then add 1. Now, let's say that we have two L's for label, right? So when our label has a value, this is going to evaluate to 1. So it's not going to return 0. So this is again going to evaluate to 1, and we add 1 to that so that we set our value for L to 2. And we do that for all the rest of the characters in our object. And if you want, you can actually just iterate through the whole thing. You can just make this 0 and then just make this I. So you have Bella, label, and roller. But the reason I didn't do is because, well, I want to iterate through my first string in my array to check if all the other characters have each and individual character. So that sounds confusing, but this is just extra work that we are not going to use. So let's just leave it here for now. Later we'll delete it and see if that makes an impact. So now I want to be able to iterate through all the characters. And remember that I'm going to use Bella, the first string in our array, to check against other strings. So let's use a for of loop. So const, let's do character of element or string at index 0. And if I were to just console log my characters, so console log character, and you will see Bella, each character. So Bella. Now I want to check if the rest of my elements in my array has that specific character. So to do that, I'm going to use a method called every. So if map.every, so if every word has a character, so word at character. So if it does have it, what I want to do is I want to decrement the count by 1 because I need to decrement it because I need to be able to account for duplicates. So I need to decrement it, otherwise I'm going to return null. And you have to give a parentheses in front. If that evaluates to true, what I'll do is I'm going to push my current character to my output. And here you can see that we do have our result, right? But how did this work? Well, we're iterating through all the characters in our first string, and we're running every method on our map, and this only evaluates true if all the words have the current character. And if it does, it's going to decrement the count by 1 so that we can count for duplicates later, and we don't want unwanted duplicate over here. Otherwise, it's going to return null. So if it doesn't have that character, it's going to return null. If not, it's going to just decrement it and then just evaluate to true, and then run this line where we add our current character to our output result. Now, let's clear a few things up. Well, we mentioned that we don't really need this first string object, right? Count of the first word. And the reason is because we're just using this loop and we're using the first string, so element at index 0 to iterate through all the characters. So that's console log character, and we should get Bella. And if I were to just get rid of Bella object, we do that by subtracting by 1 here, and then we start at index 1. We have only label and our roller, and still we are able to iterate through our first string, which is Bella, and still get the same result. So that is a extra work that we don't need, so that's why we took it out. It doesn't really matter if you keep it, it's not much of a difference, but still. So now let's delete that and check if this worked. And you can see that we have CO for our second result, which looks good. Now let's go through our code one more time. Now, first thing we did was declare a variable for map, which is going to store the count of each characters as an object, where key represents the character and values represent the count of each character. We created an output variable for our result. Now we iterate through our array of strings, and we start at index 1 because we don't need a count of characters for our first string. So we do that for all the rest of the strings in our array. Initialize an object, so we push it in, and then for that current word and index, we push in index -1 because, well, our map starts at index 0, and then it's going to have up to index 1. It's not going to have index 2. And you saw that if you were to just start at 0, we would have a error. So we pass in our index and our label. Our index is going to evaluate to I-1, which is going to be 0, and we pass in our label, so 0 and label over here, and we are iterating to all the characters. We made a variable for current character, and if our object has a value, it's going to evaluate to whatever that value is, so this, and add 1 to that. And if it doesn't have that value, this is going to evaluate to false, and then we return 0 and then add 1 to 0. After that, we are saving that value or overriding the value. We are overriding the previous value with the new one. So at first, this is going to be invalid. It's false. We don't have a value for it at all. So this is going to evaluate to false, not a number. And we're going to return 0, and we add 1 to that, and we save it as 1. If it does have a value, let's say 2, this is going to evaluate to 2, so we don't hit the rest of the statement. So 2 plus 1 is going to be 3. We set the value equal to 3. Now we go down here. Now we do that for all the strings in our array. And after we're done, we go down here. We iterate through all the characters in the first string, and we go to our map, which is an array of objects. And each object is going to be checked, well, does it have the current character? If it does, I want to decrement by 1 and then add my current character to my output variable if all the words have that character. So if any one of the string doesn't have this current character, it's going to evaluate to false, and then it's going to go out and get the next character and then check again and again and again. just one important thing is that after we check, we decrement the count of the character by 1 because we want to be able to handle duplicates correctly. And finally, we return our output. Now let's implement our second solution. And our second solution, we're going to use a lot of array methods to implement this one. So it's going to be more compact. And if you're good with array methods, I think this should be easier compared to the iterative approach. Now, first thing what I want to do is I want to get my first string in my array. So that's going to be input array at index 0. And what I want to do is I want to split this so that I can make it into an array. And you can see that we have our array of the first character, right? And on that array, I want to use a reduce method. And our reduce method is going to take two things, our output, so our accumulator, and our current value, which is going to represent the character. Let's now give an initial value of an empty array. And let's just console log our character. And you can see that it's printing Bella, which again is the first string. Now, same as before, I want to have an if statement to check if the current character is in all of my strings in my array. So same as before, we're going to use for each element. If it has the current string, I want to return true. So to do that, let's use includes. Now what this is doing again, it's running every method on all the characters in our array. And if any one of them evaluates to false, this whole thing is going to fail. So it's not going to run the inner statement, which we haven't implemented yet. But just know that this is going to evaluate to true if all the characters have our current character. Otherwise, it's going to evaluate to false. So if it evaluates to true, we want to obviously add that current character to our output. So let's do output push our character. And right now it's just returning undefined because we haven't returned our accumulator here yet. So let's return our output. So it should be good. All right. And now is the most important part. So what we want to do is if it does evaluate to true, you want to get rid of that current character from our string. So for instance, well, does B exist in all the characters or all the strings? No, it's not, right? But how about E? E is here, and E is here. Well, if that happens, I want to get rid of E here, and E here, and overwrite my original input array. So it would be BLLA, LABL, and ROLLR for the last one. So to do that, what we're going to use is we want to overwrite our initial array or input array, and we're going to use a map to return a new array. So for each word, you want to replace our current character. So word dot replace our character with an empty string. Now you can see that we have our result, right? But how did this actually work? So let's just console log our input array, and let's just console log it one more time up here. Here, what we have is our regular first initial input array, Bella, label, and roller. Now B is going to fail because it's not in rest of the strings. So that's if statement evaluates to false. Now it's our E. Well, E is in all the strings in our array. So what we did was here, we are getting our current word and replacing the current character, which is E, and we are replacing it with an empty string. So that's why we get array of strings without any E's. Now we do that for rest of the characters and keep deleting characters that's common in all of the strings. And when we're done, we just return our output and we get our result. So let's go over this just one more time, just really quickly. First thing we did was we splitted our first string Bella so that we can iterate through them using reduce. Our output is first going to be an empty array, and this is going to be what we are going to return. And we have our current character, which is the values, and we get our values from this array. So that's Bella, right? And we check if all the words have the current character, so char. If all the words have it, we want to add that word to our output array, which is this, and override our input array with the new array. Our new array isn't going to have the current character, so it's going to remove the common character one at a time until we have no common characters. So we do that over and over again, and finally return our result. And let's just uncomment this, and you can see that this one worked well too. If you guys find this helpful, make sure you guys like and subscribe. Thanks.